Hi there, and welcome to the Celeb Tea. Kelly Dodd once cut through the noise of reality television with a voice that was blunt, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. On The Real Housewives of Orange County, she quickly became the person viewers either loved to watch or loved to hate, provocative, volatile, and spectacularly candid. Her willingness to say what others only hinted at made her a ratings asset. But the same trait that elevated her to fame eventually eroded her career and public standing. Early on, Kelly's sharp tongue and fearless confrontation were rewarded. Producers leaned into the tension she created, editors framed her lines as show-stopping moments, and audiences tuned in because anything could happen when Kelly was on screen. Her remarks were memorable, her comeback stung, and her anger felt like part of the entertainment. The payoff was straightforward: more airtime, bigger storylines, and the kind of notoriety that translates into brand deals and invitations to high-profile events. But what wins attention doesn't always build longevity. Over time, that appetite for instigating conflict hardened into a pattern. Private jabs became public tirades. Playful trash talk slipped into outright cruelty. Arguments that once read as dramatic television grew more personal and repeated themselves across seasons. Feuds with fellow cast members escalated beyond shouting matches into moments that made viewers uncomfortable rather than entertained. When provocation became routine, the novelty faded and a grimmer portrait began to form. The shift was gradual but unmistakable. Disrespectful comments, repeated slights, and moments that hovered near the edge of physical confrontation painted a portrait of someone who preferred humiliation to reconciliation. Sound bites that were clipped and reshared on social platforms built a public archive of offense. In an era when clips can travel farther and faster than ever, every careless word has a longer life than any single episode. That permanence meant that sponsors, who once saw Kelly's bluntness as marketable, started to view her as risky. The turning point came at a time when the world demanded seriousness and empathy: the global pandemic. While many people used the hiatus from filming to emphasize safety and solidarity, Kelly publicly shrugged off caution and made remarks widely interpreted as insensitive. Comments that downplayed the severity of the crisis, mocked mask-wearing, or suggested loss of life was somehow inevitable drew swift condemnation. These were not private musings, they were broadcast and amplified, and that changed the stakes. When celebrities speak during a crisis, words carry weight. Kelly's posts didn't just offend a niche group, they attracted mainstream backlash. Petitions circulated, asking networks and sponsors to take action. Brands that had once benefited from association with her persona quietly distanced themselves. The consequences were tangible: canceled appearances, ended partnerships, and a reputation that began to look toxic rather than simply brash. Apologies followed, but timing and tenor mattered. Mea culpas that arrived only after sponsors left or public pressure mounted were often read as damage control rather than genuine contrition. Repetition compounded the problem. A string of insensitive remarks over time constructed a pattern that apologies alone couldn't erase. When statements leaned into defenses, framed grievances as misunderstandings, or blamed the media and cancel culture, they failed to rebuild trust. Compounding the pandemic-era fallout were earlier incidents that resurfaced and reinforced negative perceptions. Clips of racially charged or dismissive comments reemerged online, and when context is stripped away, only the most inflammatory lines remain. For a public figure whose brand relies on being shareable, such resurfaced moments function as evidence rather than isolated missteps. Sponsors evaluate risk in concrete terms. A headline that threatens a brand's image is far more consequential than a temporary rating spike. Legal threats and public disputes prolonged the narrative. When career setbacks occur, some figures resort to lawsuits or defamation claims to push back. In Kelly's case, aggressive public defenses and occasional legal posturing often kept debates alive in the headlines instead of letting them fade. Private disagreements that might have been settled off camera became public spats, accompanied by lawyers' letters and pointed social media posts. Litigation, or the mere threat of it, extended the life of controversy and drained resources, attention, and goodwill. Family dynamics also played a role in the unraveling. Personal conflicts that spilled onto social platforms turned private pain into tabloid fodder. Co-parenting disputes and online arguments with relatives made what might have remained intimate struggles into spectacles. As those tensions became content, the image of the flamboyant reality star shifted toward one of instability. Audiences who initially enjoyed the shock value began to feel sympathy for those on the receiving end, and the sheen of entertainment gave way to concern. Social media, the same technology that amplified Kelly's brand, ultimately magnified her missteps. Each impulsive post, defensive reply, and viral clip fed an outrage cycle. While a core group of supporters praised her defiance, broader audiences read her tone as arrogance and insensitivity rather than authenticity. Platforms that once echoed her name now echoed criticism in ways advertisers and networks could not ignore. Visibility remained high, but profitability declined. Controversy kept attention, but scared away the partnerships that pay the bills. When the balance tipped, the consequences were clear. Networks grew cautious about whether entertainment value outweighed reputational risk. Sponsors withdrew support, public appearances dried up, and opportunities that once seemed endless receded. Industry insiders focused on long-term brand partnerships and ad revenue began to view association with incessant controversy as too expensive. For a personality who relied on notoriety, cutting off those revenue streams was devastating. Attempts to rebrand after the height of the backlash struggled to gain traction. Claims of being misunderstood, arguments about cancel culture, or late apologies were rarely enough to reverse momentum. Rebuilding public trust requires consistent humility, demonstrable change, and time. Sporadic statements and confrontational defenses don't meet that threshold. As the narrative settled, Kelly's audience narrowed. A smaller, fervent group of supporters remained, but the casual viewers and mainstream partners she once relied on had largely moved on. In the aftermath, Kelly tried to pivot to alternative platforms, podcasts, independent live streams, and small-scale appearances. Those avenues gave her a direct line to loyal listeners who appreciated her bluntness, but they didn't restore the reach or revenue of mainstream television and major brand partnerships. Without those wider platforms, her public life became smaller and louder, an echo chamber where defiance was celebrated but growth was limited. There's also an industry lesson. Reality television makes money from conflict, but networks must balance short-term ratings against long-term advertiser relationships and public trust. Viewers' expectations change as society evolves. What was once shrugged off as outrageous entertainment can be reinterpreted as harm. For on-screen personalities, the path forward requires more than provocation. It demands responsibility and the ability to adapt. Kelly Dodd's arc is a reminder that visibility is not the same as influence. Provocation can ignite attention, but it can also burn bridges. In a media landscape that increasingly rewards accountability, the kind of outrage-based fame that once seemed inexhaustible has a limited shelf life. Her story is less about a single fall from grace than about the predictable consequences that follow when behavior valued for drama crosses a moral line. It remains a cautionary tale for anyone building a brand in the outrage economy. Attention can open doors, but integrity is what keeps them open.